You and your party sat gathered around a blazing fire at the end of a long winter day, as darkness envelops the camp. Putting an end to the peaceful quietness of the mountaintops, the wind begins to pick up in its ferocity. Over time, the noises emerging from the tree line distort towards something uncanny. As you gradually withdraw from the fireside conversation, the more it sounds like the forest is calling your name. Wendigos. Hey, I'm Hound, your resident werewolf lunatic. But it's not just werewolves that I go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs for. I like a plethora of monsters and cryptids in my movies. Werewolves are, of course, at the forefront, but I do enjoy a good Bigfoot film or giant reptile film here and there. All things in moderation. Among the lesser cryptids, I find there's one in particular that is heavily underutilized, especially given that it lends itself so magnificently to psychological horror. So, what is a Wendigo anyways? The myth of the Wendigo has its roots in the many Algonquin-speaking tribes that are mostly located in the northeastern region of North America, an area that is predominantly covered by mountains with a climate that is unrelentingly harsh come winter, a landscape that very easily could lead to excessive famine and starvation. As far as stories of the Wendigo go, there are generally two forms that pop up the most. The first of which is the Wendigo as a flesh and blood creature that preys upon humans, sometimes specifically targeting the weaker members of a tribe or group. There's some discrepancy in the visual depiction of the Wendigo, but generally they have the creature, bringing about it a stench of decomposing flesh, pictured as 10 plus feet tall, unnaturally thin, with elongated and distorted humanly features, frostbitten extremities, lips that have been gnawed away, and sometimes even having glowing eyes or a chest cavity that illuminates with an icy heart at the core. Some stories mention that the Wendigo grows in proportion to its meals, keeping the Wendigo ever hungry and in search of food. The Wendigo is an exceptionally skilled hunter, not only equipped with supernatural strength and speed, but also heightened senses fit for stalking prey. The other common depiction is of an evil spirit that would take hold of the mentally weaker members of a group, leading to an insatiable hunger that would turn them to cannibalism. Sometimes these depictions blend, and the spirit of the Wendigo will possess someone, turning them into the creature bearing the gnarly features we discussed. And despite pop culture renditions of the Wendigo that have become so iconic and, honestly, sick as fuck, I have never seen mention in folklore of the creature bearing any deer-like qualities such as antlers or a snout, which is alright. I totally wasn't upset or anything over that discovery when I was younger. The symbolism in the story of the Wendigo is one of never-ending greed, and the use of the Wendigo as a storytelling device is vast, covering topics from colonialism and capitalism to the destruction of the environment. Above all, the story of the Wendigo is one akin to a fairy tale. Much like how modern Hansel and Gretel might be told to children so that they'll be wary of trusting strangers or wandering too far from home, the tale of the Wendigo is told to strengthen the tribe's sense of community and ward off selfish tendencies that would be a detriment to the group's survival, especially in dire times. Well, now that we know what a Wendigo is, where it comes from, what it looks like, and what the story means, let's finally move on to some films. But nothing can ever be that easy. See, I had seen a bunch of Wendigo films prior to wanting to make this, but in the interest of being as thorough as possible, I wanted to watch them all. Or at least a good bit of them. I even read a short story by Algernon Blackwood. And I never read. I'm not even reading the script. Little did I know that this would be a brain-racking and nigh impossible task that nearly made me stop production of this video. The first hurdle in trying to find all of these Wendigo films to watch for this video is that there are so many people who just name their Wendigo film Wendigo. Why would you do this? Imagine if werewolf films were just a bunch of films named Werewolf, and then a few with a weird spelling like Weirwolf or Veerwolf, and then the rest were all super artsy ambiguous names like When the River Cries, where you have to pull up an IMDb review from 2008 to verify if there's even a werewolf in the damn thing before you spend the time procuring and watching it. Yeah, can you tell I got irritated pretty fast doing this? The second hurdle was that the majority of films that I could find and verify that they were actually about Wendigo, the actual plural form of Wendigo is Wendigoag. The more you know. It just sounds weird to say in a sentence. So I just say Wendigo. They were mostly short films. I have nothing against short films, sometimes I even prefer them, but the problem comes from their availability. If it's not uploaded for free on YouTube and findable via a simple search, good luck ever finding it. Then we add on that previous hurdle of everything being named Wendigo, include the movies that haven't been released yet or are so obscure that you can't even find a place to purchase, let alone a rip of them. And yeah, I was not able to find or watch nearly the amount of movies that I wanted to for this video. Despite the hurdles, I went through quite a number of films to see if I had missed anything over the years, and yeah, basically I didn't. I set out with 3 major films that I really wanted to discuss, and those stayed the exact same throughout the entirety of making this video. But I do have a few honorable mentions that I'd like to go over first. The Retreat. On a bachelor party trip backpacking through the snowy Adirondack high peaks of New York, you couldn't just go to a strip club or Dave & Buster's. Gus and Adam, seemingly on the last threads of their friendship, encounter a mythological legend in the mountains, leading to one trip of a film as Gus hallucinates that he murdered and ate his friend. Or did he?
That's what happened.
Or did he? Who knows? Not this film. The director of this film and part of the team were also involved with the Wendigo film Dawn of the Beast. It did not make the honorable mentions list. They seem to make a bunch of sci-fi light movies, although a couple actually got my attention and made it onto my watch list. Anyways, the Wendigo in this film is interesting. It's acting as ringleader to a bunch of smaller creatures. We don't get a name, so I can't say for certain, but they may be lesser Wendigos. I don't know. The Retreat possibly uses the Wendigo to juxtapose the relationship between the two men, where Adam is on his way to living a married life, and Gus isn't quite ready to let him go. The act of killing and eating his friend being one of greedily keeping Adam to himself. The Retreat was a fine film, even if it fumbled at times. More so a psychological thriller than a film about a Wendigo, which is completely fine in my book. The monster effects are not good. I had to remind myself that this was a low-budget film a lot when it came to the creatures, but that's because when you have such a beautiful setting and location to film at, the budget can seem a lot higher than it actually is. I also couldn't help but feel like I'd seen every single male actor in this film in a gay porno.
Dope.
I don't know why. I enjoyed the somber scenes a lot more than the action horror scenes. The acting was serviceable, the lead guy did a good job, cinematography was alright. It was a fine film, all things considered. Devil in the Dark. In an attempt to mend a wilting bridge between he and his brother Clint, Adam decides that they should go hunting in the wilderness together. A pastime that, given a traumatic experience Adam endured, became Clint and his father's bonding activity, leaving Adam alone and feeling alienated by his own family. We see the two brothers butt heads on their trip up the mountain, as there are clearly unspoken words between them. Atop the mountain, they encounter a beast of folkloric origin that has been stalking them and that may have a history with Adam. The dynamic between the brothers in this movie is palpable, and keeps you intrigued when things start to get hairy, both story-wise and script-wise. The drama is what drives the story, but it spends far too much time on the drama, and too little on the creature, leaving quite a lot to be desired in the horror aspect of this horror film. I'm all for a familial drama film, with hints of a creature, but it feels like this movie doesn't quite find the proper blend of childhood nightmares and adult conflict. I can see the potential of this film, but the mishandling of the horror is what keeps an otherwise neat script from really flourishing on the screen. The Devil in the Dark's Wendigo does... Quick interjection. Upon several rewatches for the purposes of editing this, I noticed that this might not even be a Wendigo. The word Wendigo is never mentioned, nor is there any cannibalism or anything tying it to the folklore. There is only talks of a character having gone missing in the woods recently, the topic of hunting and the older brother working at a company involved with deforestation, and of course the experience that the brother had as a child, which could even be called into question. So despite looking like your typical Hollywood Wendigo, I'm more inclined to believe this isn't a Wendigo and is more a symbolic representation of something using the antlers as a motif. But because I already spent several days worth of work on this portion, it's staying in. Wendigo? Close enough. The Devil in the Dark's Wendigo doesn't get a lot of screen time, but it has a lot of presence. When Adam the apparently gay brother,
I just thought you were gay.
was younger, he got lost in the woods and found himself in a strange place. He keeps having nightmares or visions of this antler-infested part of the woods and feels compelled to return in the hope of getting answers. Upon returning, the Wendigo takes Adam, and it's up to Clint to put the past behind him and risk his life to save his brother. That's what the film's about. All in all, I did enjoy the film, much more than a lot of the entries in the Wendigo flick catalog. Good acting, especially out of our two leads who have the entire film hinging on their dynamic, an interesting drama, and a good setting, as well as some interesting design choices, especially with the layer of the Wendigo. So that's why it gets a shout here. Dark was the night. Kevin Durand, my fellow 6.5-footer, is a very, very, very sad man in this slow burn creature feature. Paul Shields is the sheriff of a small town that's bordering on being labeled a village, where everyone knows everyone, and their past. When a mysterious presence makes itself known to the population, everyone looks to Paul for answers. But he's as in the dark as anyone. He has to step up to be the leader of his town and face his own grief along the way. Good acting out of the Blob, and we love seeing Nick Davinci in this household. Also, hey person from Halloween Resurrection. The creature effects of this film are mostly done in CG, and the Wendigo has a more reptilian look to it, which I'm not completely opposed to be fair. But for the majority of the film, you don't even see it. You just know that it's there. And it has the Jaws effect, where you don't see it because of the budget, but it heightens the atmosphere and horror of the film, and it fits tonally. So it all works out in the end. As for symbology with the Wendigo, we open with the disappearance of members of a logging company in the mountains. So there's a bit of destruction of the land, but the main character is also dealing with a ton of grief. Specifically, the inability to let go of his son, who passed away an untold amount of time ago. And when he starts to come to terms with that and rebuild his family, is when he finally comes face to face with the Wendigo in this story. I watched this film shortly after it came out in 2014, and it was when I was getting into my more morose phase when I started liking sad films about being sad. And boy, do I love my horror films to be sad. I also love my films to have tons of static long shots, bonus points for static long shots of forests, add one of my favorite creatures of folklore to the mix, and to say that I liked this film at the time is a vast understatement. Themes of grief and loss blend with the slow and ever-looming threat of an unknown creature in a small town, building to a climax befitting of an action movie, followed by a hasty ending involving a cliffhanger that takes the film down a couple of notches for me due to its implementation. Overall, I like this film a lot. Blue filter and all, but it sadly falls short of being one of the main films that I'll be discussing today. All three of these honorable mentions, funnily enough, are available to watch for free, with ads, on Tubi. So if any of these interest you, go check them out. Just go in with metered expectations, as always. A quick honorable mention is Frostbiter, Wrath of the Wendigo. If you're into schlocky 80s films with a homegrown vibe and killer early metal soundtracks, then this movie might be for you. It's a lot of fun to watch, but not a whole lot of substance when it comes to its usage of the Wendigo as anything other than a menacing antagonist. But in the film, the Wendigo is uniquely portrayed with stop motion, and that gives the film some serious charm. Back to the video. Also, yes, I am aware that Pet Sematary name drops the Wendigo. But before we get to the big bucks, there's just one more thing we gotta talk about. We can't talk about Wendigos in film without mentioning, in my opinion, the goat. Maybe the Wendigoat? This guy is basically my twin, except you take the love and the passion that I have for werewolves, and for this guy, it's Wendigos. Larry Fessenden. You might not have seen his films, but you've no doubt seen this man before.
We're all on the same endless highway.
Annie, this is Orchard. Come back.
He just happens to have not one, not two, but 3 films about Wendigos, and we will be going over them all, starting with the episode he directed for the anthology TV series Fear Itself, Skin and Bones. Oh hey, Wendigos are basically just like really emaciated people, right? Man, I know just the person till Larry already beat you to it. Yeah, he got Doug Jones. And, like you would expect, he fits the role perfectly. He looks like if he said he could eat a horse, you'd believe him. Good job, Doug. So, Doug, I'm just going to call him Doug. Doug goes missing during a group trek into the woods and returns alone, leaving his family in the dark about what happened on the excursion, and especially what happened to his group. There's also an in-family cheating scandal afoot, roll tide, and the return of the Doug has increased the anxiety in the air. It only gets more awkward from there as the reunion is underscored with Doug's newfound intense hunger. Fear itself is a pretty hit-or-miss series, but it's always nice to see a bunch of established directors in the genre get a little bit of a budget to do a fun and short project. Skin and Bones isn't a full hit, but is nevertheless enjoyable. It has a nice giant log cabin setting that reminds me of a family friend's cozy abode planted deep in the mountains. I wish more of the budget went to camera equipment, which, to be fair, could be said about the rest of the Fear Itself catalog. But Fessenden works well with what he has here, and delivers an episode that, albeit cheesy here and there, brings some good fun vibes and sits in the upper portion of its contemporary episodes. The Wendigo here is much more closely related to actual folklore than Hollywood imaginations, played wonderfully by Doug Jones, who hams it up just enough for it to be a bit unnerving against the rest of the straight-played cast.
Here's an onion and a carrot.
One interesting part is that the atmosphere in this is creepy and thick, but it's not your normal atmosphere. It's all in how the family responds to Doug. It reminds me of an abusive household, everyone walking on eggshells as to not disturb the sleeping bear in the cave. I think it adds a nice touch to a film that could have just been a cash-out monster fare and called it a day, showing that Fessenden, even when being relatively simple in comparison to his other works, can't just leave it at that. Next up is Fessenden's first Wendigo feature, titled Wendigo. If anyone should be able to get away with it, it's him. And God, the font for this title is awesome. Anyways, on his way to a weekend vacation getaway with his wife and Heisenberg's kid for some reason, George's automobile has a bone to pick with the local wildlife, causing deer hunter Otis to be mighty peeved about the whole ordeal. He sees that it was his deer, but the car called dibs, and well, that just doesn't jive with old Otis. The situation is diffused, well, by just ignoring it. So really, it wasn't diffused, just postponed. George makes it to his Airbnb and settles in for a relaxing weekend. Psych. Otis frequently passes the place and keeps tabs on the family in his own special way. The tension racks up from there. One of my favorite aspects of this film is the oddly wholesome relationship of the family and how well they are written. It kept seeming like they were going to get into arguments, but I guess because the wife is supposed to be a psychiatrist, she's more equipped when it comes to language and how it can be perceived by all parties. They'll have these little spats where they don't necessarily put down the other person, but they vocalize their differences and explain their positions very acutely, and it was just nice to see, to be honest. Here's an example.
Well, I don't want to be analyzed right now.
Miles sees this stuff. You've got all this anger that you carry around from work or I don't know where, and he feels it.
Everyone's got anger.
Oh, he thinks it's directed at him.
Oh.
He doesn't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
The downside of this film is that most people will probably be going into this one expecting a creature feature or just a standard horror film. Standard horror film, this is not. If anything, this is a drama thriller with an accent of folk horror. I found that going into a rewatch of this film for this video, knowing what the story is and what to expect, I actually enjoyed the rewatch of this film much more than my initial watch some 10 plus years ago now. So I will repeat, if you plan to watch this film, do not expect your typical horror film. Think more Devil's Advocate, less Constantine. Hopefully that makes sense. The technical aspects of this film are interesting. Lots and lots of time lapses with a sprinkle of some avant-garde type editing akin to Jacob's Ladder here and there. Plenty of hospital cup straw sound effects in the background for that special ambiance. Good acting on all parts. Dewey even did as good of a job as you can expect from a child actor. I always love seeing Patricia Clarkson, and we even get frequent Ty West collaborator Chameleon John Sparadakos. I forgot to look up how to pronounce that name. Apologies. The Wendigo, in Wendigo, is one that seems to be more an agent of retribution, as the movie is filled to the brim with themes of revenge. Ultimately in the story, it may have been Dewey who unleashed the Wendigo to carry out punishment.
Well, Wendigo only goes after bad guys, Miles. You're safe. You know, a lot of people, they make up stories. make sense of the world. And that's okay. That's what myths are. They help us talk about stuff.
In this film, the Wendigo seems more benevolent. Instead of the malevolent and overwhelmingly evil spirit of folklore, it appears more Gollum-like. It also is sporting the iconic visage of Antlers, looking less like a bedridden Doug Jones and more like a weredeer with access to a squat rack. And you already know that gets my goat. The Last Winter. Ron Perlman is the head of a research team digging around the Alaskan tundra for the best locations to set up shop and frack till the caribou come home. A couple of environmentalists show up and rock the boat. Perlman wants to frack, but the man keeps putting him down. Soon, characters start experiencing hallucinations in the frozen wasteland. The group tries to rationalize, maybe it's gas seeping up from the ice, maybe it's psychosis. But eventually, everyone just agrees on the necessity of evacuating the research facility, which is becoming an increasingly difficult task to accomplish.
She's a piece of ass, right?
Featuring good acting out of pretty much everyone involved, specifically Ron Perlman, Connie Britton, and James LaGrosse, all play off each other really well.
Nature calls.
Cinematography here is awesome. It's not a forest setting like you'd expect, but the endless white of the empty landscape adds to the unnerving isolation and makes for a very creepy atmosphere that's unlike other Wendigo films. The Wendigo and The Last Winter are of the spirit variety, and are more visually similar to caribou than they are deer. I also learned a new word for this. The Wendigo here are facultative bipeds, because they spend most of their time as quadrupeds, but they can switch to bipedal locomotion when needed. Yay learning! I really like the symbolic tie-in with the Wendigo spirit and the oil, fossil fuels, climate change, the whole economic greed over the health of the environment thing, nature versus humans.
North Industries. Trust, risk, results.
This is very in line with the Wendigo mythos. I really enjoyed this one because it was a very understated film with a message. It's essentially a bunch of people holed up in a snow-covered, isolated building, going insane. But at least they have each other. I also really enjoy movies that are focused around an environmental message, and I feel like this one doesn't beat you across the face with it. Watching The Last Winter and Fessenden's Wendigo back-to-back actually made it a lot harder to pick my favorite. I went in thinking that Last Winter was better, but with the heightened rewatch of Wendigo with the sick costume and both of them having great atmosphere, I feel like I couldn't pick which is better now. Last Winter definitely brings the symbology and the ethos of what the Wendigo is, but Wendigo still stands tall and brings its own experience and unique story. So yeah, Larry Fessenden has brought a lot to the table when it comes to Wendigo films. 3 movies that all have their own strong suits and themes. I hope he comes back to making Wendigo films, because not only would it be funny to have an even higher percentage of the good Wendigo films directed by one person, but because I genuinely feel like the story is in good hands with him. I've also heard that he may have made a werewolf film. Maybe I'll be making a video on that soon. Now that we're done with the appetizers, I hope you're ready for tonight's main course. Antlers. Frank Weaver is a widowed father of 2 young boys, one who goes to school and one who doesn't. He's currently cooking meth at an abandoned mining facility when he ventures too deep into the mine, past a field of hanging sachets, and encounters a dwelling creature. Frank and his friend are attacked, followed by his youngest, wandering into the mining facility. We fast forward 3 weeks, and now we're following Julia Meadows, a teacher who relocated to a small town in Oregon that has a new student that she's worried about. Lucas, Frank's eldest child, the one who goes to school. Julia has noticed that Lucas has been exhibiting far too familiar signs of abuse, and because it's a movie, she oversteps boundaries as a teacher in an attempt to help Lucas. On his way home after being bullied at school, he spots a skunk. When he arrives home, he walks up to a door that is heavily guarded and locked, with a sachet that looks like the ones from the mines adorning the doorframe. The acting in this film, especially since it's dealing with 2 very young children, was actually handled really well. Jesse Plemons' character is practically not there, but that's more the character than the acting. I think he's supposed to be overly reserved and underspoken. The amount of time we spend with the younger brother is severely limited, and the time we do spend with Lucas, he does a good job, leaving Kerry Russell to essentially carry this film in her backpack. And she does a phenomenal job. She's got such a recognizable face, so I was surprised to see that I only knew her from Cocaine Bear, and not much else.
Have you ever done cocaine?
What?
Hopefully she'll get some well-deserved credits in the future. By far the best technical aspect of this film, however, is the cinematography. I'm simple, I guess. All it takes to please me cinematography-wise is static wide shots of pretty landscapes and a long average shot duration, which coincidentally is pretty much what this entire film is. Therefore, I love it. Another thing is that the color grading is really well done. It has a very muted look, but despite that, the colors therein are very vast and vibrant, even when being understated. I saw that the cinematographer for Antlers, Florian Hofmeister, can we just appreciate how sick that name is? Florian also worked on The Terror, which I still need to see as of writing the script in November, and still need to see as of recording the Talkin' Head portion in December. But along with that, I saw he also received a nomination for his work on Tar. So that's cool to see. Dude clearly knows what he's doing, and I can't wait to see what's next for him as well. Antlers actually has a creature on screen, and I think the design is great. Even before the transformation happens, I love the addition of a glowing chest cavity. I can't remember exactly, but I do distinctly recall imagery of the Wendigo with an ice blue glowing exposed chest and heart. It could have been from that weird monsters collecting card game thing that was a subscription service back in the early 2000s. Anybody else remember those? Yeah, the design here is pretty damn good in both forms. The final form, looking metal as fuck, is large and domineering, which, given the topic of abuse, specifically from a parental figure, is very fitting. Antlers uses the mythos of the Wendigo as a vehicle for discussing cycles of abuse, particularly child abuse and neglect. I love that in the film, Frank isn't necessarily actively trying to harm his children. We can tell that he still cares for them. It's just the drug dependency and the lifestyle that comes with it that is hurting them. He, in his current state, cannot provide proper care for his children, but it's not like he's not trying. You could argue that the greed of Frank, the addiction to and the production of meth, is what got the Wendigo's attention. But also in the film, there's a news station mentioning that mountaintop mining can save the coal industry.
To revive the coal industry by promoting what is known as mountaintop mining.
Yeehaw, brother! So the environmental destruction and greed over resources very well could have been what awoke the spirit of the Wendigo, and the town boarded up the facility with a haul of sachets to ward it off and keep it stuck in the mines. Another minor thing that I enjoyed is that we see a lot of hinting at what transpired between Julia and her father, but nothing is ever explicitly stated. In one scene, however, her brother mentions in a one-off comment,
You have no idea what he did to me.
Now, cynical me, knowing Todd here, he could have just been bullshitting and disregarding his sister, putting her down and all that balagna. But a part of me, given that it's mostly open for interpretation, thinks that he also has trauma. Trauma that cuts deep. So deep that he can't even muster to speak it, let alone deal with it. And all of this just adds on to this notion that everyone is carrying around so much of this shit in their day-to-day lives, which is true in reality. Overall, I like what this film was doing. I really do. Creature design was great. Cinematography was practically made for me, but the story was just a few minor tweaks away from bringing this up a notch. Nevertheless, Antlers still sits atop of the mountain of Wendigo films. But this next one lays claim to the peak. Ravenous. The movie opens up with a military ceremony promoting John Boyd to the position of captain. But something is amiss. As his men were being slain on the battlefield, Boyd played dead. Stacked with his fallen comrades, he miraculously finds the strength to fight back. His victory over his captors earns him a public promotion, but his cowardice earns him a one-way trip to Fort Spencer, an outpost filled with the military's less favorable members. Very soon after his arrival, the team makes a discovery of a weather-scarred and malnourished man outside the fort. After rescuing him from the elements, he attempts to explain what happened to him, telling the group that his name is Calhoun, and he was a part of Colonel Ives' group heading to the Pacific Ocean when he led them off route, followed by a nasty storm that locked them in a cave for 3 months, where they ate the oxen and then the horses, until finally resorting to cannibalism, stating that when he left, there were 2 members of the party left stranded in the cave. Upon hearing this, the group decides to embark on a rescue mission. Oh, some honkies are eating each other in a cave? Let me introduce you to the Wendigo right quick. When they finally reach the cave that Calhoun talked about, they discover 5 skeletons hung from the ceiling, making the realization that there were no survivors, and Calhoun had instead ate them all. and then lured the Fort Spencer crew into a trap. Calhoun attacks, taking out the group one by one, leaving Boyd the last remaining survivor, severely wounded next to the body of Reich, who he has to reluctantly eat in order to survive. When Boyd makes it back to Fort Spencer after his encounter with Calhoun, no one will believe the story that he tells them. Things only get worse when General Slauson appoints a temporary commander at Fort Spencer, Colonel Ives.
How's the leg?
Ravenous has a stacked as fuck cast. Guy Pearce as John Boyd, Robert Carlyle as Colonel Ives and Calhoun, David Arquette as Cleves, Jeremy Davies as the Godnut, that sounds too weird, person with a fixation on God, Toffler, Stephen Spinella as the Southern alcoholic Knox, Neil McDonough as the trigger-happy and slightly psychotic Reich, and Jeffrey Jones as the head of Fort Spencer. The acting in this movie is top-notch, all across the board. Every actor fully embodies their role and hammers it home, each of them having their own little moments that make them more relatable and full-bodied. A lot of this, I believe, is due to the director. Antonia Bird was brought on extremely late to the process, and even ignoring how little time she had to prepare, she did an amazing job. The majority of her experience is with character-driven stories, and it shows with how well each of the characters here come across. She also does a spectacular job with the shots. The cinematography in this film is just right up my alley. Beautiful landscapes, impactful close-ups, and it all just comes together in the mix. Speaking of the mix, the music. If you've seen this film, you might know what I'm going to say. The music is very odd at times, and it doesn't, at first, seem like it would fit. Like if you heard some of the music by itself and then were told the type of film that it was being used for, it's a Western horror with elements of black comedy, you probably wouldn't be able to see how it could work. But the magic of it is that it does. The music in this movie is just something else. And like previously stated, once everything comes together, like fine dining, all of the elements act to enrich each other, bringing the movie to a whole other level. One of the best parts about Ravenous is that the conversation that it's initiating is one that is so deep and can be talked about for hours, from many different perspectives. It uses the mythology of the Wendigo as a metaphor for, well, Ives says it himself. Manifest destiny.
Westward.
Expansion. Settlers moving west in search of land, power, and riches, sacrificing their fellow humans in an attempt to be on top. The belief that, innately, something belongs to them and is rightfully theirs, leading to a very dog-eat-dog, or in this case, man-eat-man society. This is also a movie that makes it very difficult to eat meat after viewing. It strongly ties cannibalism, and by extension the consumption of all meat, to colonialism.
What about you, Captain Boyd? You don't eat meat?
Only as a last resort.
It's a pity.
Add on top of all of that the subtext of addiction, as well as the not-so-subtext of closeted homosexuality, and this little horror comedy western soars to heights that most dramas would kill for.
Eat to live. Don't live to eat. Huh? Huh?
So I finished editing this segment and I realized that I really just wanted to keep talking about Ravenous. So one of the other points that I wanted to talk about was the dynamic between Boyd and Ives in this film. Boyd is very stoic. He says very few lines and is mostly just reacting to what the other characters are doing, which is perfect. He's sternly planted in the ground in his position that he will not succumb to cannibalism. On the other end of the dinner table, we have the silver-tongued evangelical cannibal, Ives, who is pulling absolutely no stops in trying to convert Boyd. Sure, Ives has the Jeffrey Jones character, but he doesn't really want him. And besides, he was very easy to pull to the dark side. Someone like Boyd stands as a sort of unachievable goal, making Ives want Boyd even more. To corrupt someone that is so proud. This is what drives the story of Ravenous and honestly just makes it so captivating. If you want a video that goes even more in depth with the film, I have good news. Someone's already made one by the name of Atun-Shei Films. I went to try to find that video to link in the description recently, and it turns out he actually made a longer version that's more updated and more in-depth and better in all regards. So yeah, I'll leave both of those videos in the description if you want to go check those out. And yeah, I just wanted to sit and talk about the film a little bit more. And yeah, back to the video. Later. Black Mountainside. After the unearthing of a potentially older than previously thought possible structure in the frozen north of Canada, say the line, Bart.
Aliens.
A professor is brought to an archaeological dig site to aid in possibly dating the discovery, as well as to report back on anything that the crew may need moving forward. Soon, things start going south. The native workers disappear, presumed to have returned to their reservation. All communications are cut off on the site, and a few of the members experience hallucinations as the isolation starts to get to everyone. Now, if you've seen this movie before, I know what you're thinking. And this is going to be a pretty fucking big revelation considering the video I'm making. There's no Wendigo in this film. I have duped you all. You have been bamboozled. But hear me out. I've watched a lot of movies. A lot. And when I try to envision what my ideal Wendigo film would be, the setting, the characters, the pacing, sound design, every detail, the movie that comes to mind every single time that gets as close as I've seen is Black Mountainside. And yes, it's less Wendigo mythos and way, way more Lovecraftian by nature, but it checks off so many boxes for a Wendigo film, and specifically what I would want from a Wendigo film. Winter. Check. Forest. Check. Isolation. Check. Folklore. Check. Natives who know better than to stick around. Check. A bipedal deer guy beckoning you from the tree line with a human voice. Check. Like, Black Mountainside was made for a budget of... I literally can't find a budget. It's hard to find anything about this film at all. We do know the director's name. I'm gonna just call him Nick. And we also know the actors' names. Despite being relatively unknown actors, they all deliver a good performance. And some of them even breach into great territory. The cinematography, editing, grading, all of that is good, if not great. I obviously enjoyed all the wide shots of trees. Again, I'm very easy to please. But where this film excels for me is actually the sound design. Seemingly foregoing the use of music, instead letting the location's natural ambiance seep in and surround you, quiet moments are almost too quiet, letting you sit there with your thoughts. And the tense moments of chaos are overwhelming, with all of the commotion heightened by the fast editing and tight shots. If you haven't noticed, I kinda do something similar with my videos. I find it takes far too long searching for the right music, especially for such long videos that would easily require 20+ tracks. Add to that the fact that nearly every avenue I've used to find royalty-free music has burned me in the past. Instead, I just opt to use a recording of my backyard from early fall of 2020 and slap it under my videos with some slight tweaks. I like it. It adds to the atmosphere, and I also really enjoy the campfire talks kind of vibe that it gives. So let's talk about that deer, huh?
You're not God!
A lot of people seem to really hate the deer in this movie, but I love it. Given the constraints, I'm sure that a butchered taxidermy job looking ass deer on stilts is possibly the best they could have done, but the funny part is that it works. It's nestled cozily right in the pit of the uncanny valley. Combined with a deep reverberating voice, this thing becomes hypnotizing and enthralling. It reminds me a bit of Lynch when he uses CGI. It looks bad, sorta, from like a technical standpoint, but it unnerves you like nothing else could. Kinda like Livia Soprano. Ugh. If you don't like slow burns and prefer action-focused movies with at least 2 jump scares per minute that lay everything out neatly and explain it to you multiple times, then this is not the film for you. Sorry for the shade. However, I am a giant fucking sucker for these types of films. Small locations, small crew, forest, isolation, Lovecraftian tones, suspense, mentally engaging, all of it. When I first watched this film 8+ years ago, it really did feel like it was made just for me. And I hope that if you decide to watch this film, that you like it too. Tier lists are still popular, right? In order to neatly wrap up the video, I would like to recap the movies that we have discussed, go over the Wendigo's depiction in them, and talk about the symbolism that the films decided to use. And it just so happens a quick little tier list serves as a format to do all of those things. The Retreat. The Wendigo here is not on screen a whole lot. More frequent are the little Wendigo underlings that, while you could argue do look like the traditional Wendigo, that is emaciated with gnawed teeth and glowing eyes, it just looks silly here. Symbolism-wise, I kind of admire the toned-down story. It's not about some grand thing involving history or anti-consumerism or anything like that. It's just about a dude who can't let his friend go. This one is going in C tier. Devil in the Dark. I already mentioned how this could possibly not be a Wendigo, but let's just continue as if it is one. Visuals are serviceable. I really do love the antler-infested cave entrance where it resides, and the fact that I keep hammering on that kind of tells you all you need to know about the creature itself. Symbolism is again very understated and small scale. It's about grudges and trying to move forward in life, letting the past stay in the past. I could be completely wrong with this reading, but that's how I feel about it. This one is going at the top of C tier. Dark Was the Night. The Wendigo here is a mixed bag. The reptilian design is unique and makes it stick out from other depictions. When we're seeing the practical costume, it's great. But when they prefer to use CG, which is almost always, it doesn't feel right. The symbolism here, at least to me, is about having to let go, especially when you don't want to. Yet again, having to move forward and not dwell on the past. This one is going at the bottom of the B tier. Sorry, Kev. Skin and Bones. Played amazingly by Doug Jones, I feel like this is a really good representation of what a true Wendigo would look like. It's not a creature. It's just a person overtaken with an immense desire to eat humans. The symbolism, as said by Fessenden himself, is one of rage coming from the Wendigo. The anger over his wife and brother's relationship is what fuels his desire to live, so much that he'll let the Wendigo in. This interpretation is solid. A tier. The Wendigo. We finally got some antlers again. Here the Wendigo takes 2 forms. A flesh form that has him looking like the aforementioned buffed up weredeer, and also a spindly, vaguely human-shaped skeleton of antlers and bones. Despite its screen time being very minimal, I think that both designs are great and interesting. The symbolism also raises it up a bit, even with it branching away from the actual story of the Wendigo. Because in my eyes, the story here is of how children interpret the world. Again, the quote of people using stories to make sense of the world is important. The Wendigo acts as judgment. It's there when the boy witnesses something traumatic, but it's not doing harm there. However, it's not so harmless in the case of Otis. B tier. And it's only below Skin and Bones because that had Doug Jones and a faithful depiction of the Wendigo. Last Winter. Here we get something unique, again, from Fessenden. It's not a Wendigo as a cannibalistic giant in a horror film, but as a sort of earth spirit, seeking justice against humans for the destruction they've caused. The visuals here are also interesting, as it's a herd of ghostly caribou, appearing mostly as otherworldly manifestations in the film. Sadly, despite how cool both of these things are, the only real link to the folklore of the Wendigo is the environmentalist message that the film is wrapped in. This film is going in B tier. It really is tough to choose between this film and Wendigo. But I think Wendigo, in the context of the best Wendigo depiction and story, does come out on top. Antlers. You already know the Wendigo itself is getting high marks. That thing is just sick as all hell. Not traditional by any means, but very much modern, and one of the best in my opinion. But the themes are present here as well, although not at the forefront. Mountaintop mining, baby. The story is also very well taken care of, and carries this film just above Skin and Bones at the top of A tier. That creature design is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but the story holds up. Ravenous. The Wendigo in Ravenous is very faithfully depicted. It doesn't have antlers, it's not a giant, it's just a person, more akin to the story of the spirit of the Wendigo that possesses someone at a moment of weakness, granting them, essentially, superpowers, and of course virility, but also a severe and never-ending hunger. This film also brings with it the direct acknowledgement of what the story of the Wendigo really is about, and ties it directly to westward expansion, colonialism, and the consumption of animals. Ravenous will be going in S tier. Black Mountain Side. Yeah, it's a dope as hell design and a great movie, but it's sadly not a Wendigo. Gold star for effort and the consumption of animals. Ravenous will be going in S tier, and my light just died. We finally made it to the outro. It is like 5 fucking o'clock in the morning. I have been doing this since 10 p.m. Wendigos in media are sparse and hardly ever get utilized to their full potential. A lot of directors just substitute the Wendigo for a Yeti and call it a day. Or they haphazardly shove in the story of the Wendigo to make their film different than the other movies. When I personally feel that the story of the Wendigo is best suited for slow and methodical psychological horrors. Which sucks, because just look at him. I know it's the Hollywood made-up version, but look at it. Jesus fucking Christ, this thing is so fucking metal. The fact that a creature this fucking sick also brings with it immense symbolism that can lend itself to numerous types of stories just makes it more baffling that not only are Wendigos in film so rare, but we still haven't seen a Wendigo film that I'd call perfect. But that doesn't mean that I'll stop watching and enjoying the ones we do have. And hey, Larry Fessenden could always come back home and make another banger. Later.